In today's video, I would like to show you guys a combat using my last 4 builds, the Planar Squadron. Now this is a pretty low difficulty encounter, but the goal here is to show you guys the power of these builds working together and the basic strategy. Not to bore you guys with a long drawn out encounter. This video is going to assume that you've seen my last 4 build videos. If you haven't, you can check them out right here. But just to remind you guys, we've got our Wei Yang Ranger, our Naughty Monk, our Skeleton Oracle, and our Gorin Wizard. So, our party is stuck in the fire plane, and they need to get out. However, while trying to find their way out, they run into this fire giant. Now, this fire giant is a relatively low encounter for them, but of course the fire giant doesn't know that. So, it's time to roll initiative. And since we're starting initiative, and all party members are definitely within 20 feet of our Dead Space build, otherwise known as our Skeleton Oracle, he gets to use Oracular Warning, which means everybody but our Skeleton Oracle and the Fire Giant gets a +2 on their initiative. And 5 extra hit points. Temporary hit points, but still. Our Ranger gets a 37, so he gets to go first. Then, the Monk and the Oracle both get 29. But the Monk has a higher initiative modifier, so he goes first. Then, our Gorin Wizard gets a 33, so he goes next. And finally, the Fire Giant gets a 22, so he goes last. So the first thing our Ranger wants to do is, of course, hunt prey, which not only gives him his Flurry Hunter's Edge, but also allows him to make a free Recall Knowledge check. And because I'm using all these builds at level 10, that means our Ranger gets to use Nature for this, regardless of what creature it is. And he gets a 30, which is a success. So he gets to ask one question, and he asks, what is its lowest save? And he gets that this Fire Giant's lowest save is Reflex. Not only that, but he also gets the effects of both Monster Hunter and Monster Warden, which means he gets a +1 bonus to his next attack roll against the creature, and a +1 to his AC and saving throws against that creature. In addition, he can tell his allies to give them the bonuses as well. Telling your allies may take an action depending on your GM. However, if I was GM, I would not require that. But in any case, next the Ranger is going to use his Warden's Boon feat on the Monk. This means the Monk will only take a -2, -4 on his multiple attack penalty next round. And finally, the Ranger is going to use the Demoralize check to try to frighten this enemy. Unfortunately, he only gets a 22, which this Fire Giant's will DC is 28, so it does not work. And the Fire Giant is immune to the Ranger's Demoralize for basically the rest of the encounter. The Ranger didn't have the actions to both move and attack, so there's no reason for him to move into the Fire Giant's reach. So it's better to demoralize here than it is to just move up and not be able to attack. I'm sorry guys, I screwed up on the initiative. The Wizard got a 33, which means he goes next. The Ranger may have found out that this Fire Giant's lowest save is Reflex, but our Wizard wants to know, is it weak to anything, elemental-wise? So, he's going to go ahead and do a Recall Knowledge. And he gets a 29, which is also a success. Which means he finds out that this Fire Giant doesn't like cold. Unfortunately, the Wizard is not within range to use his cold spell that he has prepared that requires a reflex save. But he figures, maybe it'll fail on his fortitude save against frostbite. So he casts that. Next is our Monk's turn. And he has a speed of 40. So he can really easily get to the Fire Giant with one action. Next, he's going to go into his Reflective Ripple stance, which of course gives his unarmed strikes the trip trait, in addition to a +1 circumstance bonus on his trip attempts, which means now he can use Flurry of Blows with a trip thanks to Flurry of Maneuvers. So the first thing he does is try to trip this Fire Giant. With his plus 21 bonus, he gets a 32 against the Fire Giant's 26 reflex DC. So the Fire Giant is now on the ground. Now, with his second strike of Flurry of Blows, he decides to attack this creature. And because he has the Flurry Hunter's Edge from the Ranger, he gets a plus 19 on this, rather than a plus 17. And he gets a 34, which is a hit. So the Fire Giant takes 16 damage and has to make a fort save against being stunned. Of course, sadly, he does get a 37, which is a success. So now it's our Oracle's turn. And he's got to be extremely careful because he's already Curse Bound 1, and he's got to worry about these lava pits right here. Luckily, he's nowhere near either one of those, and he doesn't have to move at all. So, he is going to go ahead and cast Chilling Darkness at rank 5, which requires a spell attack roll. And yes, the Fire Giant is definitely within range. And he gets a 29, which is a hit, but only because the Fire Giant is prone. Chilling Darkness deals 41 damage, plus an additional 10 damage because the Fire Giant is weak to cold. And the Fire Giant is not immune to the Oracle's Demoralize. So, he is going to use his Demoralize on this Fire Giant. And he gets a 35, which means that the Fire Giant is now Frightened 1 in addition to being prone. And now it's finally the Fire Giant's turn. And he has to stand up because he's prone. But this activates the Monk's Stand Still feat, which allows the Monk to punch him, since standing up from being prone is a move action. And the Monk gets a 38 to hit, which is a critical hit, but only because the Fire Giant is prone and frightened. And if you don't know, if you get a critical hit on Stand Still, you disrupt the action, which means the Fire Giant is still on the ground. So, he now has to spend another action getting back up. Sadly, the Monk only gets one reaction per round, so he can't use Stand Still again. But now the Fire Giant only has one action, so he's going to use it to try to hit the Monk with his Greatsword. The Fire Giant gets a plus 23 to hit because he's Frightened 1. And he only rolls a 4, which means he has a 27, which misses the Monk's 30 AC. So at the end of round 1, the Fire Giant is already down to 78 out of 175 HP and has had one action, which it missed with an attack. Okay, so that was a very good round for our heroes, but let's see what happens in round 2. So, of course, our Ranger gets to go first, and he is going to move 25 feet. Then he's going to go ahead and use that Warden's Boon feat again to give our Monk his Flurry Hunter's Edge. And now he's going to use Twin Takedown. Unfortunately, he gets a 28 on both hits, which is a miss. So, he doesn't do any damage this turn. Now it's our Wizard's turn. And unfortunately, she's not in any position to hit the target with a spell that does cold damage and requires a reflex save. But there is a spell she can cast, and that is Paralyze, which requires a will save from our Fire Giant. And our Fire Giant gets a 27, which is just barely a failure. So, the Fire Giant is now paralyzed for next round. At this point, our Wizard does want to move so that next round she can hit the Fire Giant with a cold spell that requires a reflex save. So, she's going to move her full movement, and that's the end of her turn. Now, for our Monk, she's going to go ahead and use a Flurry of Blows. A trip and then a strike, thanks to Flurry of Maneuvers. He gets a 40 on the trip, which is a critical success, which means that the Fire Giant is now on the ground and takes an additional 5 damage. Sadly, A 24 does miss on the strike, even though the fire giant is off guard. For the monk's second action, he's going to go for another strike at a -4 rather than a -8. Sadly, a 25 also misses. And for the monk's final action, he's going to raise his shield, as monks are very good with shields. And he's going to choose for it to be a 15-foot burst within 120 feet, so as to not hit his allies and be able to hit this foe. The fire giant either gets a reflex save or a will save, its choice. So it chooses to do a will save since its will save is higher. It gets a 37, which is a success. So it takes half damage. That's 12 plus an additional 10 for its cold weakness, because our Oracle decided to do cold damage with his Shadow Blast. There's not much else the Oracle can do at this point other than take a step back. And don't worry, our Oracle is still within range of spells. And now we come back to the Fire Giant's turn, but it is paralyzed this round, which means no actions for him. That was a far less good round for our heroes, but the Fire Giant is now down to 51 hit points out of the 175 it started with. And now we move on to round 3, starting with our Ranger. Now, the first thing our Ranger is going to do is use his Dance of the Tiger Ancestry feat. That's a performance check against the target's will DC. And he gets a 28 on his performance check, which is just barely a success. Which means the Fire Giant is now frightened 1, in addition to being prone, because he couldn't stand up last turn because he was paralyzed. Now our Ranger is going to go ahead and use his Warden's Boon again, so that our Monk can get his Flurry Hunter's Edge, and then Twin Takedown. He gets a 39 on his first attack, and a 29 on his second attack. So that's a hit and a critical hit. Due to his Serrating Rune on his daggers, he deals an additional 1d4 damage on each of these strikes. That means he does a total of 29 damage. And again, he only got that critical hit because the target is prone. Now it's our Wizard's turn, and he's got to move because he wants to hit this Fire Giant with Chilling Spray, as that is a 15-foot cone that requires a reflex save on his part. But if you try to use it where she's at, he's only going to hit her allies, which is bad. So she's got to move 20 feet first. So Chilling Spray at 3rd rank requires a reflex save from our Fire Giants, and he gets a 28, which is just barely a failure. So he takes 12 damage plus an additional 10 damage for his weakness to cold. So a total of 22 damage, which is just enough for our Fire Giant to fall. So as you can tell, Recall Knowledge can be extremely helpful. In this case, it told the party a bunch of different things. First, it told the monk that he needed to try to trip this Fire Giant rather than try to grapple it. The second thing that we found out is that it was weak to cold, meaning cold spells would be very effective. And it also told the 2 spellcasters we need to hit this thing with spells that require reflex saves. Sadly, our Oracle didn't have any spells that did cold damage that required reflex saves, and our Wizard only had 1 spell. But of course, you're going to be preparing different spells here, so you may be able to pick better spells for your situation than I did for mine. Of course, this was a low difficulty encounter, but this is a basic idea of the strategy you should be using if you're using this party. Obviously, if you're facing something stronger, you're probably going to need to spend at least some of the time with your Oracle healing. And even with this encounter, he could have hit with that 1 attack that he got off, and he could have succeeded on that will save against the paralyzed spell. So you might even have to heal on something like this. But the strategy remains. Use Recall Knowledge to find out what you need to do, and then just do it. Plain and simple. But as you could tell from my second round, there are a lot of things that could go wrong here. You could miss. You could fail on the recall knowledge. You could even fail the trip. Even an encounter like this can be kind of bad if you don't roll well. And a higher level encounter is not going to be this easy. But this is the strategy. And that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my little combat simulation here. And hopefully you understand now how this party is supposed to work together. If you guys did enjoy this video, you can absolutely leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2e teamwork content. You can also check out the links in the description below for my Patreon page, as well as my Discord and my social media. If you guys are interested in Runelord Wizards, you can absolutely check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.